And Chris Sawchuck will be joining us in just a few minutes. Encourage you to ask your questions. Just post them into the chat and we'll do our best to be able to address them throughout the program. Also, before we get started, it would be great if you drop a hi and tell us where you're from. And if you're going to be attending ISM World in Orlando in just a few weeks, this is a great time for you also to get to know some of your fellow attendees while you attend this session. Why don't we go ahead and get started? My first speaker is going to be telling us a little bit about combating counterfeit parts in aerospace and defense. So a very interesting session. And then we're also going to be jumping into Chris's session, which is CPO key highlights from a recent research study that was completed. So we'll really kind of get behind the scenes to understand what are leaders thinking about in the procurement and supply chain profession. So first, I'd like to welcome Sarah Baire. She is a principal specialist in supply management with Raytheon Technologies. She's got an incredible background. She's an experienced supply chain professional with proficiencies in government procurement, negotiations, risk management, supplier management, and counterfeit parts avoidance. She has obtained her Juris Master from Florida State University in legal risk management, contracting, and compliance. And she's also completed 2 masters from Webster University in procurement and acquisitions management, as well as management and leadership with an emphasis in project management. So welcome to the stage, Sarah Baire.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
So great to have you. Thanks for joining us. So why don't we jump in? This is a very interesting topic. It's something very specialized and different for our conference. So what really inspired you to kind of tackle this issue and talk about it in your session?
Well, the concept really kind of came to me back in 2017 when I was going after that first master's in procurement and acquisitions management. I had to write it wasn't considered a thesis, it was a research paper. And you had to actually go out and collect your own data regarding that research paper. And at the time, I was working at Kennedy Space Center, and I was just a little lowly buyer, nothing big or fancy at the time. And I was working with a lot of small businesses that when you're working in government, you have small business set-asides that you're supposed to have for your contract. So about 26% of them. So we were using a lot of these small businesses to buy our electronic components. Now, granted, they were going to the authorized sources, or they were telling us they were going to the authorized sources, but we were using these small, like woman-owned, small disadvantaged businesses that met those caps for our small business set-asides, and we were buying the parts through them. So I found it interesting when it came to this topic because I was curious about their processes. Like, do they actually go and make sure they're sourcing the right source of supply? Are they going to OEMs or just authorized distributors, or are they actually going to brokers and then just bring them in-house and then saying that they went to the right source of supply? So it was a questionnaire that I sent out to all of these small business suppliers that were in our network. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of got this feedback, and it was just really interesting to see that really at the end of the day, we probably shouldn't have been using those suppliers because they weren't like ISO certified or AS 9100 certified, or, they might have misunderstood the requirement and just went ahead and went to what they thought was an authorized source, but they didn't actually double check with us. We ran into some issues where, the parts would get set aside as suspect while we were at Kennedy Space Center, but nothing really damaging came out of that. But it was interesting to see the process, and that paper really kind of propelled me, I guess, in the future with all my buying, making sure that I was going to the right source of supply. So that's kind of where it all started. And then after I left Kennedy Space Center, I went to L3Harris Technologies for 5 years, 3 of those years as a buyer, 2 years as material program manager. So, in those realms, you see, again, a bunch of other sources of supply, different vendors that you're working with to buy parts, and the concepts still apply. At first at Kennedy Space Center, I was just looking at electronic components, but really when you think about counterfeit, it goes everywhere. Like, go buy a purse, say it's Coach or Prada. How do you really know that it's a Coach or a Prada purse? Would you know the
Exactly.
difference? I'm going to tell you, no offense, a lot of guys wouldn't know the difference. Same with rings. When we're talking about, diamonds, right? How do you know it's a real true diamond versus a fake diamond? And a lot of people, they just don't know that difference, and that it doesn't make them bad for not knowing the difference. It's just what happens when it's a serious situation like aerospace and defense, when you're buying these parts that are going to systems that have people's lives in,
Exactly.
it's your military, your Army, Navy, all of those guys. And then you also have just your normal stuff, like with us, cell phones. You were hearing stuff on internet not too long ago about cell phones exploding because the lithium ion batteries were getting too hot and exploding. So it's those little things that kind of all combine together when you're thinking about counterfeit. It's not just one part or one area. It's all areas. And the thing is now is, in counterfeit, people see money from it. And so they take advantage of situations, especially like in 2020, when we have a pandemic where everybody shuts down and people need sources of supply. They see that as an opportunity to get into that area and take advantage. So it's just something that has just always been with me since writing that paper. And I've always just been trying to get better and continuously learn and improve and make sure that I'm passing along that knowledge to other people as well.
I mean, it's a really key topic. I mean, everybody's looking at supply chain risk, right? And, and really thinking a lot about their visibility into their supply chain. So this is a really kind of a key component, which goes into a little bit about kind of that threat, and a critical concern. I think you kind of touched upon this a little bit for aerospace and defense sector right now. With counterfeit parts, do you kind of really still see that as something that's a high risk at this
It's
point in time?
definitely a high risk. It's one of the things I think they're really starting to crack down now in aerospace and defense and pushing it forward. So, for example, I've been Raytheon now for a couple of years, and I was impressed because they actually had a specific Q note that called out on their parts counterfeit compliance measures. And I really like that was flowed down because you're putting that on paper to tell the supplier, this is what you need to follow. And these are the process we're expecting to see when we get delivered parts. And I like to see that was already instituted when I came here, because I had not physically seen something that specific yet in my other roles. Now, granted, I can't say that hasn't changed since I've left those roles, but it was just nice to see that they specifically called it out as its own standalone Q note. And I was impressed by that. And then when it comes to aerospace and defense, I actually got an opportunity to speak about the same topic at the NCMA World Congress in Seattle last year. And after I was done speaking, I actually had a lady come up to me who has been in the military and done procurement military buying. And she actually explained to me a situation where, they had an idea that the parts were counterfeit, but the lead time to get the real parts in versus their mission, they had to counter the risk. They had to determine if they wanted to proceed with what they suspected were counterfeit parts and go into the field with it, or completely squash the mission and wait for however long to get those real parts in. And they took the risk to continue with the counterfeit part, and they had a fire.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it really shows the criticality of procurement and the decisions that you make.
Exactly.
And the ripple effect that it can have all the way down the supply chain to the end product. So that's really incredible. Your session description mentions gaining visibility into part information. What does that look like in practice, especially for complex systems?
Yeah, so I think the complex systems is really where it gets hard, right? So if say you have this big assembly build and you're going to a source of supply to build this, well, you're not looking at them to say, yes, you're asking them to build a big system. You have a full bill of materials that go into that system, but you're expecting that supplier to make sure every single piece part that they buy to make that system is being bought from the right source of supply. And that's where the challenge is if you're going to this supplier and you have a parts list that has 300 pieces and they have to go out and source all 300 pieces, and making sure you're flowing those right quality notes and telling them, hey, we need to make sure that you're going to authorized distributors, the right sources of supply. If the part is obsolete, then tell us. Don't just go out and go to a broker and say it's okay. Those little things that we put in our purchase orders, the quality notes, the terms and conditions, they all make an impact with how they source their supply. So that's something that we have to consider when we're creating these complex systems, is making sure we're thinking about that up front. So that way, when we expect a supplier to build for us, they're getting all of that information up front and they're doing it to our expectations. And I think that's where a lot of stuff comes into play, is how in depth are we providing our work instructions to our suppliers to make sure that they are doing what we need them to do to get the right source of supply.
So communication, definitely very key.
Definitely.
So for supply management professionals outside of aerospace and defense, are there some lessons from this session that they could kind of take away as well?
So I, as a buyer now, that even though I'm aerospace and defense, I tell you that it's really come into my personal life a lot more. If I see something online like Amazon or something like that, and I really think it's too good to be true, I do really do a little bit more due diligence in sourcing and making sure that I'm getting the right product. Because I don't know about you guys, but I know I've bought stuff off Facebook and stuff like that. And then you buy it, and then what you get is not what you ordered at all, not even close. And It's one of those things. It's like, well, what do you do? Well, let's look at your source of supply. If it looked too good to be true, it probably was too good to be true. Then what can you complain to, right? Well, in aerospace and defense, the complaint would be if you lose life, limb, property, and then it turns into a whole legal risk. For example, we talk about commercial, right? The airbags, the Takata airbags that had, when they, upon impact, there was a mechanism inside that was actually releasing shards of metal that was actually killing people and not saving their lives. And that's the whole point of the airbag was. And because of that, Takata went out of business. They had to file bankruptcy. And all of the car suppliers that use their airbags were all impacted with their reputation wise, because they are the ones that put those products in their cars. So it becomes a trickle effect too. So it's not just what happens to you, it's what happens to everybody that's involved. And I think that's something that we should always consider when we're going out and buying whatever we want to buy, even if it's just for yourself, a bed, a car, a house, right? We do all of our own due diligence for those kinds of things. So we should expect to do the same thing when we're buying our sources of supply for aerospace and defense.
Absolutely. And obviously aerospace and defense, you have some very critical, like you have lives on the line, but in a lot of different products, and I'll say this from a market share perspective, you could be dealing with reputation, product quality, market share loss, so, like you said, all of these decisions really do have a ripple effect on the performance of the company. So what are one other key takeaway that you would see from your session that people could walk away with?
The biggest concept in my mind is always ensure your source of supply is who you need for the product that you're trying to buy. If it's specific for aerospace and defense, is that supplier AS9100 ISO certified? Are they an actual authorized distributor, or are they just a broker? Because there's a lot of independent distributors out there that claim to be authorized distributors, but they're not. And so this session will really just kind of solidify how you can go about double checking those sources and ensuring that we are doing our due diligence as a company, as procurement professionals, supply chain, to ensure that we don't receive counterfeit parts that could impact loss of life, limb, property, all that.
Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us, telling the folks a little bit about your session. I think it's going to be pretty incredible. I think they'll walk away with a lot of great information to kind of help counter some of these threats. So thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in Orlando.
Yes, I'm excited. Hope to see
All
everybody
right. Next up, we've got Chris Sawchuck, who's going to be joining us, and he's going to be talking about some of the key highlights or insights from CPOs from a recent study. I don't need to do the introduction. So many people know Chris, but I'm going to go and tell you a little bit more about him. He's the principal and global procurement advisory practice leader at the Hackett Group. He has over 25 years experience in supply management, working directly with Global 2000, all the way down to mid-sized companies around the globe in a variety of industries to improve all aspects of supply management, including process redesign, technology enablement, operations strategy planning, organizational change, and strategic sourcing. Chris is a trusted advisor to many of the world's leading procurement organizations and is a regular contributor to business publications and author of numerous research papers and books. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate that you're going to be a speaker at ISM World 2025.
Yeah, well, thank you, Angela, and looking forward to it. I was actually just listening to Sarah and her talk, and she made a comment that, about some of the counterfeit that, some of the husbands may not know whether
exactly.
or not. I was just going to say I would definitely resemble that comment. So I wouldn't know the difference. So.
Well, the first step in the solution is admitting to the problem, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we're all going to take away some valuable lessons from that and be looking a little bit closer at the labels, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's dive into a preview of your session. Mm-hmm. Your research captures some key insights into procurement and strategy year over year. Yeah. So can you talk about what stood out most in this last year's research?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's always interesting. Maybe not everyone knows the study, but it's a study that we've been doing for over 15 years. And so this question about what stood out, you can go back in time and look at different things that are happening in the broader economic climate. And what you do is see that reflected in some of the studies that we go through, especially around the priorities. I would say that the thing that really stood out to me, and it actually started to percolate last year, was this priority that leaders of supply management have around transforming their operating model. Mm-hmm. And, some of you may say, well, we've been doing that for a long time, but, one of the things that we haven't seen is it elevate into a key priority. And when I talk about the operating model, I'm talking about it very broad. We're not just talking about organization. What we are talking about is process. We're looking at the technology infrastructure that you may use to enable that environment, that capability that you have. We're looking at even where you actually source labor to go do that. And we're looking at the information and data requirements of that capability that you're building. So it's very broad. But what we saw was that it was elevated last year into a top 10 priority, and it's even further elevated this year. The question really becomes is why? So.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm sure you're probably get into a little bit.
On June 2nd. That's right.
Thank you. So just a teaser, folks.
Yes.
What are you seeing in terms of operating budgets, staffing levels, kind of overall workloads? What's happening here in 2025?
Yeah, and this is another question that we've asked for quite some time, and it's something that you go back, even over the last 10 years. And one of the questions that we ask is we just ask about, the workloads that we're seeing within supply management. We're just asking organizations, as you look into the next year, do you see that workload growing versus what you experienced over the year you just came out of? And spoiler alert, yes, we do see an increase expectation and workload for individuals and professionals in supply management for 2025 and even further. But the question is, and again, this is something that we all know, and I'll be sharing some specific numbers on this. But we are continuing to see a trend that we have seen for many, many years. And this is that labor for technology swap. Not surprisingly, we are becoming more and more dependent on technology in our organizations. The idea that we have workloads that are growing and we're going to solve those workloads with additional people are not part of the strategy going forward, and it hasn't been. So we're just seeing more and more technology. The real thing here is that technology and the type of technology that's embedding in our organizations and environments is changing as well.
Wow. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of head nodding when people are talking about the kind of the workloads, and I mean that really does tie into the org strategies in terms of that technology play. But let's talk a little bit about the procurement leaders attending your session.
Mhm.
What's one insight or recommendation that they're going to kind of take away for their organizations based on this research and what you're learning?
Yeah. And when I think about procurement leaders, these are individuals that are highly experienced and have a lot of knowledge about things. The information that I'm going to be sharing is more around, what is happening more broadly. And so I think it's an opportunity for leaders to sit there, because we went out to hundreds of different organizations to ask leaders, what are some of these priorities? Where are you making investments in your organization, et cetera, and specifically in technology? So it's an opportunity to go in and reflect on, what you see going on around you and compare that and ask yourself some questions. It may validate what you're doing. It may tell you something different. But those are really the opportunity here. I go back to an individual that I met, and this was an individual, an executive in one of the large oil and gas companies that we have out there, global oil and gas company. I remember years and years ago, I asked this individual, it was actually at an event, and I asked him, I said, so, are you finding some value out of this? And the reason I asked him, because he had an index card. And I asked him, what is that index card for? And he said, listen, when I come to these events, we're a big company. We do a lot of great things. He said, I don't always come out of here, being bowled over with all kinds of new ideas. And he said to me, he said, all I'm looking for is one. Because if I can take one idea away and scale it to the scale that we have, that's well worth my time being here. Yeah. So, when I tell executives, we're all very experienced. Can you take away a nugget that is different, something new to take back to your organization?
Yeah. And that really ties into that importance of not hearing from thought leaders and then hearing from each other to be able to find that nugget. So couldn't agree more. Tell me a little bit. You've been at ISM. You've been at the ISM World event, and particularly, what are you seeing? As kind of the value you touched on it. With that one idea. What are
Yeah.
some other things that you kind of really see for leaders? Why is it worth the time, especially with the workloads and the heads down and firefighting?
Yeah. Well, to your point, we're all doing that. I don't go out to any organization. The last 2 weeks I was in California. I was working with organizations, and the biggest challenge is that nobody has time. You talk about things that you want to do more strategically, and they're consumed by everything. And I think anybody has the opportunity to be able to get away for a few days. Use that. I mean, you're going to go to the sessions, but to me, one of the most valuable thing is the networking. You're going to be there with peers. That's the thing that I look forward to at all of the events I go to. It's the opportunity to talk to folks, to understand, to see how they're approaching things, et cetera. And in many ways, just compare, like I was saying before. So to me, the relationships, the networking, making contacts that I can call later to ask them, hey, we met at ISM, if you don't know them before, and we were talking, and you had that network that you can call upon, especially as you face other types of challenges in the environment that you're in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Chris, I really appreciate you joining the show today. I'm really excited about your session. I think that, as you said, I think this is a great time for us to take a moment stop, learn, talk to each other, build that network, because I think that the pace of business, the challenges that this profession is going to face is only going to continue. So these are the times that maybe that you kind of strengthen that network, strengthen those strategic ideas. Yeah, so you can ultimately solve those problems, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned it, things that we're living in a volatile, uncertain world. And, I don't see any signs that that's going to change anytime soon.
Mhm.
We've been dealing with this for 5 years, whether it was the pandemic and other disruptions. We're now dealing with tariffs. It's that. And we have to just sort of digest that and say, okay, how do we shape things a bit different if this is the environment that we're in? So,
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to seeing both you, Sarah, and all of our folks here live at ISM World 2025 in Orlando. It's June 1st through 3rd. If you're registered, hopefully you're able to connect with some of your friends. Hopefully you'll also be able to reach out and connect with Chris and Sarah and our other speakers. If you're not registered, there's still some time. And as we discussed, this is a great time for you to be able to build that network, talk about problems that you're facing in today, learn about future trends so you can start to adjust and plan for the future. We've got great new tools that we're introducing to enhance that networking experience, from smart badging to rooms that you can schedule with each other for networking, etc., networking events. We've got it all. So really looking forward to seeing everyone in Orlando. This is our last LinkedIn Live to meet some of those people that will be speaking at the conference. So we hope that the next time you'll actually see you live in Orlando. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.